9. A little medicine and a little Neeb. When Leah came back. Recalled Nao Kao. The car came up here and when the door opened, she just jumped up and ran into her home. Her sisters and brother were too happy to even do anything. Everyone just went out and hugged her. That night she was in our bed and we were so happy to have her sleeping by our side. Looking over Leah's sparse medical records from the spring and summer of 1986. Around the time of her 4th birthday, Peggy Philp summed up the first few months after her return from foster care in 3 words. Nothing interesting here. The Lees would disagree. Neil and Peggy had previously spent hours recounting the details of medically complex periods in Leah's history that Foua and Nao Kao had summarized for me in a few minutes. Now the tables were turned, and a period that seemed uneventful from the doctor's perspective was revealed. From the Lee's perspective, to be one of the richest in her life. The first thing Foua and Nao Kao did after Leah returned was to celebrate her homecoming and bolster her health by sacrificing a cow. In Laos, most of the chickens, pigs, cows, and buffaloes kept by Hmong families were reserved for sacrifices to propitiate ancestors or cure illnesses, by offering the souls of the slaughtered animals as ransom for fugitive souls. Even families too poor to keep animals of their own were guaranteed occasional meat in their diets by being invited to Neeb ceremonies performed by wealthier villagers. According to Dwight Conquergood, sacrifice is a sacred act performed with a respect and reverence. He has written, "The souls of sacrificed animals are precious and vitally connected to human souls. Animals are not considered to be as far removed from the human species as they are in our worldview. Since the bonding between the life souls of the patient and sacrificed animal is so intimate, it is likened to souls being wedded together." Eric Crystal, the coordinator of the Center for Southeast Asia Studies at UC Berkeley, takes an equally approbatory, if not quite so high-minded, view. So what if some Hmong feel that they have to slaughter animals to make the proper kinds of sacrifices? He once asked me rhetorically, why not? It happens because people usually mark religious events that are important to them by getting together with relatives. And it is very difficult in this world to get a whole bunch of relatives together, whether you are living in some village in Laos or in Manhattan, without giving them something to eat. So you sacralize the event. The whole animal is offered. And the whole animal is eaten. I mean the whole animal. 98% of it. Intestines and everything. In a very ecologically sound way. Americans toss away a huge amount of meat. We also kind of slip it under the rug that people actually have to kill animals to eat them. Indeed, it may be shocking to many Americans to find out that their $1.99 a pound chicken breast actually had to get its throat cut in a processing plant. So Americans are real shocked if they find out that the Hmong are doing it right in their own houses. During the last decade, shocked Americans have responded to the ritual killings performed by devotees of other religions by invoking legal sanctions. In Hialeah, Florida, animal rights activists and community leaders passed an anti-sacrifice ordinance in 1987 to prevent priests of the Afro-Cuban Santeria faith from slaughtering animals, a practice one local resident said blights the image of South Florida. The ban was overturned, but it took 4 years and a Supreme Court decision. In Los Angeles, where followers of Santeria and several other Hispanic sects were suspected of nailing cows' tongues to trees and leaving entrails on sidewalks. An ordinance was passed in 1990 that made animal sacrifice punishable by a 6-month prison term and a fine of up to $1,000. It is still on the books, though it is not currently being enforced. In Merced, almost every Hmong family I met sacrificed animals on a regular basis. In fact, a 14-year-old boy I knew, a member of the Mua clan, once complained that he hardly ever had enough free time on weekends, because his parents made him attend so many of his relatives' Neeb ceremonies, until the mid-90s. However, most American residents of Merced had little idea what was going on, and no one seemed concerned that it might blight the image of Central California. Well, I haven't run into any sacrificial chickens, Pat Lunny, the chief of police, told me with some amusement several years ago. Sacrifices, said Steve Nord, the city attorney. Do they really do that? The Hmong have a phrase, "Uav paim qaug," which means that the truth will eventually come to light. Literally, it means feces will be excreted. I knew it was only a matter of time before feces would be excreted on the subject of Hmong animal sacrifices. And indeed, in 1996, tipped off by local newspaper coverage of a dog sacrifice in Fresno, the residents of Merced began to realize that similar things might be taking place in their town, that the animals were killed quickly and cleanly and, unlike the products of a meat packing plant, were actually thanked for their services, failed to extenuate what seemed like aberrant behavior. The result was an ordinance banning the slaughter of livestock and poultry within city limits. For most Hmong, the need to heal sick family members far outweighed the claim of a mere law, so they paid no attention, and few neighbors were nosy enough to report them. However, rumors about the sparsity of dogs and cats on Merced's south side, which had circulated sotto voce for several years, upped their volume. The rumors were false, but that did nothing to stop them. Dan Murphy told me where they had originated. There was a small stove fire in a Hmong house here a few years back, he said, and one of the firemen opened the refrigerator. There was a roast pig in there. The fireman thought it was a dog, and he told his friends, and they told theirs, and instantly people were saying that the reason there aren't so many strays around here anymore is that the Hmong are eating them all, and you'd better lock up your dog at night. Well, Dang Mua heard this. Dang Mua is a local Hmong leader, and he went and got the fire chief and brought him over to the house and opened the refrigerator and said, "This is a pig. Can't your men tell the difference between a pig and a dog?" And that should have settled it. But you know, it's not as much fun to tell about the resolution of a story as it is to tell about the genesis, so that part didn't get spread around very far. The Hmong of Merced do not sacrifice dogs, which they know are protected by American law and custom, though some of them, like the victim of the dab of Bear Creek that Nao Kao told me about, may have wished that they could. They do, however, frequently sacrifice pigs and chickens, which they buy live from Hmong or American farmers. To sacrifice a cow, as the Lees did, is a rare and important event. It was the first time they had done so during their 6 years in the United States. Leah's cow cost $300, a monumental sum for a family of 9 who were living on $9,480 a year, plus food stamps. When I asked Nao Kao where the money had come from, he said, Leah had her own money from the government. It took me a moment to understand. He had bought the sacrificial cow with 3.5 months' worth of Leah's supplemental security income, a use to which federal disability assistance had probably never before been put. Because Nao Kao had no way of transporting a live cow to East 12th Street, he bought one from an American rancher who lived near Merced, had it slaughtered, and, with the help of some of his clansmen, cut it in pieces small enough to stuff into plastic garbage bags that fit on the floor and in the trunk of his cousin's subcompact car. After they returned home, Neeb performed the ritual chant that accompanied his journey to the realm of the unseen. During the chant, the cow's severed head was sitting on the Lee's front stoop, welcoming Leah's soul. When I asked the Lees whether any American passers-by might have been surprised by this sight, Foua said, "No, I don't think they would be surprised, because it wasn't the whole cow on the doorstep, only the head." Nao Kao added, "Also, Americans would think it was okay because we had the receipt for the cow." After the ceremonial portion of the Neeb was complete, the Lees and their many invited relatives sat down and ate a large, festive meal of fried beef, boiled beef, a spicy ground beef dish called lab, and a stew called qaug. When I asked Maying what qaug was, she said, "It's made out of cow's intestines and the heart and the liver and the lungs, and you chop it up really fine. And there is a part that is what is inside the intestines, and you chop that up too. Then you boil it all up together and you put lemongrass and herbs in it. It has a really bad name when you translate it. I guess you could call it, do soup." The literal translation of qaug is liquid excrement. It's a classic. The celebratory mood of Leah's first few days home began to dissipate as the Lees came to feel, more strongly with each passing week, that the child who had been taken from them had been returned in a damaged condition. According to Mei Lee, Leah had once been able to count in English and Hmong and knew all the tunes and lyrics of the traditional Hmong New Year's songs. Before the Americans took her away, Leah was really smart, said Nao Kao. If you came in the door, she would say hello and bring a chair for you. But after those months that she was government property, I don't know what they did to her. Maybe they gave her too much medicine. Or maybe she got sick because she missed us too much. Because after that, when people come, it seems she does not know them. And she could only speak a little. The Lees were under the impression that the court had returned Leah to them because foster care had made her sicker. Clear evidence that her family's care was superior. When I told Neil and Peggy this, they were surprised. They had also noted Leah's worsening developmental deficits. But in their view her downward intellectual slide had begun before she was removed from parental custody, had been temporarily arrested by her regular drug regimen during foster care, and had then been seriously aggravated by the seizures she had had after her catastrophic week-long visit home in September 1985, during which her parents had failed to administer any medications. Neil and Peggy were even more surprised, and grieved, to learn that the Lees believed Leah had been taken from them in the first place not to safeguard her health, but because the doctors were angry at us for being non-compliant, and wished to inflict punishment. And when I told them that Foua and Nao Kao, in their willingness to travel the middle road of a little medicine and a little Neeb, viewed themselves as eminently reasonable and their doctors as incapable of compromise, Neil and Peggy shook their heads in puzzlement and consternation. In order to keep Leah's condition from deteriorating further, the Lees stepped up their program of traditional medicine. I had often heard doctors at MCMC complain that the Hmong seemed to care less than Americans did whether their sick children got better, since they spurned the hospital's free medical care. Unbeknownst to their doctors, the Hmong actually took their children's health so seriously that they frequently budgeted large fractions of their public assistance stipends, or indebted themselves to relatives in order to pay for expensive services not covered by Medi-Cal. For example, the Lees spent $1,000 on amulets filled with sacred healing herbs from Thailand, which Leah wore constantly around her neck. They also tried a host of less costly but time-consuming therapies. Foua inserted a silver coin that said 1936 Indochine Française into the yolk of a boiled egg, wrapped the egg in a cloth, and rubbed Leah's body with it. When the egg turned black, that meant the sickness had been absorbed. She massaged Leah with the bowl of a spoon. She sucked the pressure out of Leah's body by pressing a small cup heated with ashes against her skin, creating a temporary vacuum as the oxygen-depleted air inside the cup cooled. She pinched Leah to draw out noxious winds. She dosed Leah with tisanes infused from the gleanings of her parking lot herb garden. Finally, she and Nao Kao tried changing Leah's name to Qaug, a last-ditch Hmong remedy based on the premise that if a patient is called by a new name, the dab who stole her soul will be tricked into thinking that she is someone else, and the soul can return. According to Foua, this plan was foiled because Leah's doctors persisted in calling her Leah, thus ruining the subterfuge. The Lees' most ambitious act of healing was taking Leah to visit a famous Tsiv Neeb in Minnesota. We had heard this Tsiv Neeb was very special because he can fix people and he gives good medicines, explained Nao Kao. In the deferential tones of someone describing a distinguished specialist he has gone to great trouble and expense to consult at the Mayo Clinic. When this Tsiv Neeb was younger he had gotten sick himself with the same thing as Leah, where the spirit catches you and you fall down. For the Hmong people, they usually get that kind of sickness before they become a Tsiv Neeb, and maybe when Leah was grown up, that would have happened to her too, and she would be a Tsiv Neeb. This Tsiv Neeb was also a member of the Lee clan, so that is why we took Leah to Minnesota. Nao Kao, one of his brothers, one of his grown daughters, his son-in-law, and Leah spent 3 days driving to Minnesota. We rested one night in Salt Lake City and one night in Wyoming, said Nao Kao. And then we took another day to get to Nebraska and then we took the whole night from Nebraska to get to Minnesota. We just stopped to get gas. I only drove for 3 hours in Wyoming because Leah kept trying to hug me, so I couldn't drive. So someone else drove and I just held her. He did not remember where the Tsiv Neeb had lived, but recalled that it was several hours beyond St. Paul. The Tsiv Neeb tied spirit strings around Leah's wrist and gave her some green medicine from roots and things like that. Some of it was boiled and you drink the juice. And some of it you boil until it crystallizes and it gets really sticky. And after it dries you eat it. The 3 family members who had accompanied them stayed in Minnesota with relatives. And Nao Kao, again using SSI money, flew home with Leah, filled with optimism about her future well-being. Once I asked Bill Selvage why Merced's doctors never seemed to ask their Hmong patients how they treated their illnesses, and he replied that because the Hmong dressed at least approximately in American clothes, had driver's licenses, and shopped in supermarkets. It never occurred to his colleagues, and only rarely to him, that they might practice esoteric healing arts. If you went down to the rainforest and talked to the Yanomamo, he said, you'd be surprised if they didn't come up with all sorts of fantastic spirit stories. You'd be surprised if they sat there and started saying, where is the penicillin for my impetigo? But if you took them to this setting, the way the Hmong have come here, and you dressed them up and they drove a car and came to MCMC, you wouldn't expect to hear those spirit stories anymore. Neil and Peggy had no idea what the Lees were doing to heal Lia because they never thought to ask. The only American who did ask, and who therefore learned of the $1,000 amulets and at least some of the animal sacrifices, was Janine Hilt. I would have expected the Lees to focus the most burning rays of their resentment on Janine, an official representative of the very agency that had confiscated their daughter. On the contrary, the Lees chose to categorize her not as Leah's abductor but as her patron, the person who gave Leah her disability money. Aside from Dee Corda, Janine was the only American I talked to who didn't describe the Lees as close-mouthed and dim. Not coincidentally, she was also the only American I ever heard Foua or Nao Kao refer to by name. They called her Jenny. She responded by learning the names of all 8 of Leah's siblings: Chong, Zua, Chang, Mei, Yer, Tru, Mai, and Pang, compared to the Olympian Drs. Ernst and Philp, who never volunteered their first names. Janine seemed warm and unpretentious. Even her size, 5'1" and comfortably rounded, was closer to the Hmong scale. Neil and Peggy were respectively 6'2" and 5'9", and seemed even taller because they had such perfect posture. Janine also had more success keeping the lines of communication snarl-free, partly because, as a social worker, she was able to make house calls. In all their years of dealing with the Lees, Neil never visited their home and Peggy visited only once. She took the sensible step of using May, the Lees' most Americanized daughter, as her interpreter. Not only was May's English excellent, like my interpreter, Maying Xiong, she had learned it in an American high school, so her grammar and vocabulary were superior to those of almost any Hmong adult. But after Janine left, Foua and Nao Kao were able to ask May, as often as was necessary, explain what Jenny said again. Janine's empathy for the Lees may have been deepened by 2 factors. She understood what it was like to live with a chronic illness, because she had severe asthma herself, and she admired the closeness of Hmong families, because her relations with her own family, who were fundamentalist Christians, had been strained for many years. Ever since they had learned she lived with a lesbian partner, she had no children of her own. Unlike the MCMC nurses who considered Leah a burden and a pest, Janine thought she was a delightful child. I just totally fell in love with her. Janine recalled. Leah wasn't your typical kid that would play appropriately with toys and, do all the right things. She was like a little blowfly flitting about, just totally out of control and wild and unsocialized, but, well, absolutely adorable. Physically, I found her a very attractive child. She was real cute and real huggable. I mean, this kid could give you a hug like no other kid could. She would climb into your arms and sit in your lap and just give you a terrific bear hug and grab your glasses and pinch your cheeks until they hurt. Janine's involvement in Leah's case rapidly escalated from a professional assignment to an obsession. A typical Hilt letter, written with cheerful officiousness to Judith Epley, a counselor at a regional agency for the developmentally disabled. Ari, Leah Lee, Dear Judy, please forward to me copies of all psychological, neurologicals, assessments, evaluations, reports, workups, impressions, studies, reviews, ruminations, appraisals, opinions, etc. on the above-named minor. I hope that covers it. Thanks for your help. Sincerely, Janine Hilt, social worker. In Neil's opinion, Janine was a large pain in the ass. He remembered innumerable times when she had nagged him for information about Leah or for prescriptions for medical equipment he considered unnecessary, such as an electronic digital thermometer that she hoped to teach Foua to use. With May's help in reading the numbers, Whatever she requested was always needed immediately and at no cost to the Lees. Janine took on the Lees like a crusade, said Neil. She always wanted to be notified about any change in Leah's condition. And, my God, it wasn't like we didn't have 6 billion other things that we had to think of. If you forgot to call her, she'd read you the riot act. I think she had trouble understanding that Leah was just one of hundreds or thousands of patients that we took care of, and we couldn't drop everything and do exactly what she wanted. But it was a double-edged sword. She was good, too. Janine was an incredible patient advocate. There was nothing she wouldn't do for this kid. One of the things Janine arranged was to have Leah bused 3 days a week to the Shelby Center for Special Education, the county school for retarded and disabled children. She hoped that Shelby would help socialize Leah as well as giving Foua an occasional respite. Leah's teacher, Sonny Lippert, recalled, Leah was very spoiled. Janine Hilt told us the family felt that she talked to the gods during her seizures and that they had this euphoric idea that she was a princess. They fixed her special things to eat, and whatever she wanted, they did. If she raised her arms, her mother would carry her through the house. She got rather chubby, and the more she sat around and let people do things for her, the heavier she got. She was a beautiful child. Her mother just groomed her until she was immaculate. Leah could charm the hair right off a dog. She was the type you'd just want to pick up. But I had a rule in my room. No one could pick up Leah. Of course. As soon as she went home, her family kept right on catering to her. Believing that Leah's behavioral problems stemmed partly from a lack of daily structure, Janine posted the following on the Lee's wall. Leah's schedule. 7. Wake up. Breakfast. Bath. 8. Meds. Leave for school. 1. Home from school. 2. Meds. Nap. 4. Playtime. 6. Dinner. 7. Bath. Pajamas. 8. Meds. Bed. Despite May's help in reading it, this schedule never fully took hold, partly because of Foua's and Nao Kao's orientation to the cockcrow system, rather than to the clock. Another fruitless effort was a list of instructions about how to administer Tylenol and Valium to prevent febrile seizures. When Leah spiked a temperature, Janine went to great trouble to have it translated into swirly Lao script, failing to realize that no one in the Lee family spoke or read Lao. But in her most important goal, persuading the Lees to administer Leah's medicine, Janine achieved a stunning success. Blood tests showed that Leah was regularly maintaining a therapeutic level of depakine. During her first 4 months at home, she had only 1 seizure, her best record since infancy. Janine attributed this period of unusual health to the depakine. The Lees attributed it to the successful intervention of the Neeb in Minnesota. In September of 1986, Leah fell off a swing at the Shelby Center, hit her head, and went into status epilepticus, the condition dreaded by all her doctors, in which her seizures, instead of spontaneously resolving after a few minutes, continued one after another with no intervals of consciousness. It was unclear whether Leah fell because she seized or whether she seized because she fell. But in any case, when she was taken to the hospital, she was found to have adequate levels of depakine in her bloodstream. Parental non-compliance, for once, was manifestly not a factor. Nao Kao's diagnosis was that the teacher made her drop from the swing, and when she fell she was scared and her soul went away too, so she got sick again. In Leah's MCMC admission summary, her medical history was noted to be complicated and her social history to be very complicated. Neil remembers this admission, Leah's 14th stay at MCMC, to be the most harrowing she had ever had. She'd been doing real well, and then came this unbelievable set of problems. She had a bad seizure. All of this food crap started coming out of her mouth and she aspirated a lot of it into her lungs. She went into respiratory failure. She couldn't breathe for herself, so we had to intubate her. Then the breathing tube caused some local irritation of the trachea. So after we pulled it out she started breathing with a lot of difficulty and we had to re-intubate her. And then she got this very unusual infection of the airway from the irritation. The parents had to go along with a lot of stuff. An oxygen mask, lots of IVs, blood work, an arterial line to measure the oxygen and carbon dioxide in her blood, real invasive stuff. Nao Kao remembered this as the time when Leah had a lot of plastic all over her. He or Foua slept by Leah's side every one of the 14 nights she spent in the hospital. He recalled, the doctors made Leah stay so long in the hospital. And it just made her sicker and sicker. Neil and Peggy co-authored an article in the Pediatric Infectious Disease Journal called Bacterial Tracheitis Caused by Branhamella catarrhalis about Leah's tracheal infection. Leah got published, is how Neil put it when he showed me the article several years later. In it, they wrote, "Our case clearly demonstrates that this agent, B. catarrhalis, has the potential for being an opportunistic infection in the compromised respiratory tract of a pediatric patient. Our patient's hospital-acquired infection was most probably the result of a local injury to the trachea from a cuffed endotracheal tube and from alteration of oral bacterial flora, with intravenously administered penicillin. Not every doctor would choose to publicize a nosocomial or hospital-acquired infection, especially if, as was the case here, it was he rather than an inexperienced resident who had been responsible for inflicting the local injury. When I read the article, I was struck, as I had often been before, by how much more interested Neil and Peggy were in the truth than in making themselves look good. I was also struck by the fact that Nao Kao was absolutely right. The hospital had made Leah sicker. Only 3 weeks after Leah was discharged, she was admitted again, despite adequate levels of medication, with severe seizures and fever. Neil and Peggy were horrified. I had been really impressed that she was having such good control with the Depakine, recalled Neil, and then she had 2 seizures within a month and I said, "Oh God, here we go again. The Depakine is not working." I couldn't think of any good way to keep her seizures from getting worse. I remember we thought about putting her under anesthesia to stop her shaking the next time she came in, so we could at least get Foua in. And I remember Dan Murphy and I had a few conversations about whether we should try surgery to try to cauterize part of Leah's brain. I really didn't know what to do. I was just grabbing at straws. Peggy said. The seizures were getting very, very long. Before, sometimes they used to stop on their own, but these didn't. It seemed like it took more medication to stop them, and we were afraid that one day we were going to try to get in Foua and just not be able to do it, because Leah was so fat and because we'd already cut down so many of her veins. If she seized long enough she was going to gork her brain out. Early that fall we started to get this feeling of doom. We talked about it a lot. It was hard to imagine that the Leah era would ever be over. But I remember thinking it was going to be. We were just waiting for the big one. Neil said. I felt like there was this giant snowball that was coming down the mountain and we were trying to hold it up there and it just kept pushing us. I remember talking to the parents and telling them that Leah's seizures were getting worse and more frequent, and that someday she might have one we couldn't stop. It was so haunting. I started to have nightmares that it was going to happen, and I would be the one on call, and I couldn't stop it and she was going to die right before my eyes. It was inevitable. It was just a matter of when.